Good evening and welcome to this evening's webinar entitled Hope for Sale, Debunking Nutrition Myths, brought to you by Can Do Multiple Sclerosis, the National MS Society, and the MS Society of Canada. Tonight we have a unique angle on diet and nutrition. We're going to be looking at nutrition myths. So our outline and our objectives tonight are to discuss the causes, sources, and impacts of nutrition and diet myths. We're going to examine some common MS-related myths. We're going to review what we know about diet and MS and look at some current studies on intermittent fasting and the Mediterranean diet in particular. And then finally, we're going to wrap up with just a few tips on how to eat well and eat easy and becoming a Mythbuster and breaking through some of those myths. So to help us with that this evening, we have two speakers, and I'm going to let them go ahead and introduce themselves. We have Katherine Fitzgerald, who's a nutritional epidemiologist from Johns Hopkins, and we have Mona Bostick, who is a Can Do MS programs consultant and a dietitian from Greensboro, North Carolina. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves real quick, and then we're going to jump right into our presentation tonight. So first of all, welcome, Katherine.
Hi, Ryan. Thanks. I'm so excited to be here tonight. So my name is Katherine Fitzgerald. I'm, as Brian said, a nutritional epidemiologist and an assistant professor of neurology and epidemiology at Johns Hopkins. My focus of research is primarily on people with multiple sclerosis, and a large portion of that is looking at how diet or dietary factors can influence how MS changes over time.
Great. Thanks, Katherine. My name is Mona Bostick. I am, as Brian said, I'm a registered dietitian. I live in Greensboro, North Carolina, where I have a private practice. As somebody who's been living with multiple sclerosis myself since 2009, I'm very passionate about working with other people who also live with multiple sclerosis. So let's get started. Food as medicine. Nutrition myths are everywhere, and they do not single out folks with MS, but there are quite a few persistent nutrition myths that seem to target the MS population. Often they stem from the concept of food as medicine. And we might be familiar with this quote from Hippocrates, "Let food be thy medicine and let medicine be thy food." But let's take a look at the history of food and medicine. In 2000 BC, it was here, eat this root. As we move forward in time, in 1000 AD, that root is heathen. Here, say this prayer. Moving up the timeline to about 1850, that prayer is superstition. Here, drink this potion. And then moving further along, that potion is snake oil. Here, swallow this pill. And then that's followed by that pill is ineffective. Here, take this antibiotic. And then that antibiotic doesn't work, here, eat this root. We kind of go back. It's kind of a circular logic that seems to be operating in the food as medicine approach. So when we are talking about food as medicine, it's really important to note that a recipe for an effective nutrition myth, when you begin to recognize the ingredients of the nutrition myth, it's easier to identify. I've included here this image of a newspaper, and the headlines listed there, I've taken like verbatim from quotes I found on the internet. It's important to know that a recipe for a nutrition myth includes, you have to start with a vulnerable public, generally one with a health condition that does not have a cure. I find a lot of these myths appeal to people with cancer, people with multiple sclerosis. Then there's the appeal is sometimes a feeling of empowerment, meaning I'm going to take control, or fear of missing out. The person on the internet had success, and if I don't try this, then I myself won't have success. Often there's a kernel of truth. MS is an inflammatory disease. But then they take vague and exaggerated, untestable claims that use words like heal, beat, reverse. They use cherry-pick the research, meaning they choose only the research studies that support their claims, or they make very broad, simplistic conclusions from complicated science and perhaps over-exaggerate the findings. And sometimes there are famous names attached to it, doctors or celebrities, etc. And then everything is sprinkled liberally with parallel vocabulary, pseudoscience, buzzwords, and jargon. It's important to know that if something cannot be tested, it cannot be disproven, even if it's not true. And when you don't understand complicated background science that's involved, complicated vocabulary can lend an air of validity to their argument. And so who is spreading the myth? Sometimes you get this information from friends, coworkers, or family, but maybe you get information off the internet from both celebrities or social media influencers. But are they credible or reliable sources of health information? I would argue no. And I've included here to the right of the screen this meme that was shared on social media, how to get rid of any illness. I knew it was a joke. I received it from someone who sent it to me knowing that it was a joke, but when I shared it on my social media as a joke, I received messages from people who were concerned that some of these things were actually accurate and that I was making fun of it. So it's really important to know that if you see a health claim on the internet, specifically on social media, it's really important to verify the claims. I mean, if you just read that, it's a joke. It's very funny. But then there are also complementary or alternative healthcare providers, and there are conventional healthcare providers, some of them with a conventional message, some of them with an unconventional message. That can make things kind of confusing. So because of the fact that these things are confusing, I thought it would be helpful to kind of break down what these terms mean. Take a closer look at what they mean. And this screenshot to the right is from the National Institute of Health website, so you can get a lot of information by going there yourself. Conventional medicine is that which is practiced by holders of an MD, a medical doctor or a doctor of osteopathy, degrees, and their allied healthcare practitioners, physical therapists, psychologists, registered nurses, dietitians like myself. And then there are unconventional medicine, which are therapies that are not widely taught in medical school or not widely available in hospitals. And there are many different terms used to discuss these unconventional medicine approaches, one of which is complementary medicine. That's typically an unconventional therapy used in addition to a conventional therapy. Alternative medicine is unconventional therapies used instead of conventional medicine. Integrative medicine emphasizes health and wellness through use of conventional medicine, like your neurologist, and disease-modifying therapy, as well as complementary and alternative therapies and lifestyle strategies. And then with the growing presence of functional medicine, I myself was searching for a definition of that, and I was having difficulty locating it. On the National Institutes of Health page, it falls under other complementary health approaches, which are defined as some complementary approaches may not neatly fit into either of these groups. Natural products or mind-body practices, for example, or the practices of traditional healers, Ayurvedic medicine, traditional Chinese medicine, homeopathy, naturopathy, and functional medicine. Functional medicine, as defined, I found the Institute of Functional Medicine website defines itself as a systems biology-based approach that focuses on identifying and addressing the root cause of disease. The root cause is another buzzword I'd like to suggest, as MS, for example, remains a disease with no known cause. In spite of the definitions, the distinction between these complementary, alternative, integrative, and conventional medicine is not always clear. This makes things a little bit more complicated by the increasing number of conventional medical doctors who are providing complementary, alternative, integrative, or functional medicine approaches to health and to MS. And that makes it confusing, and means that it falls to us, the folks who are navigating the MS experience, to make sense of it. Again, the National Institute of Health website helps to add some clarity and perspective, but it's really important, and this is the takeaway message, it's really important for you to ask your healthcare providers questions about the approach and its how it can address multiple sclerosis specifically, but ask your questions if you have them. So it can't hurt to try some of these alternative, complementary, integrative, or functional approaches. Can't hurt to try them, right? Well, that kind of depends. What are your expectations? Are you hoping to manage your symptoms? Constipation, maybe you're trying to battle fatigue, and you want to address your symptoms. That might be a realistic expectation. If your expectations fall into that vague category of heal, beat, or reverse MS, that might be leading into some difficulty. For example, restrictive diets that result in nutrient deficiencies or inadequate calories may contribute to or result in malnutrition, which would be a direct harm and not contribute to wellness. Or restrictive diets that require you to eat differently from your family, friends, coworkers, and neighbors may negatively, albeit indirectly, impact your social relationships, your work, and your home life. Expensive supplements, expensive foods, or tests that, for example, test for subclinical micronutrient deficiencies or food sensitivities, as well as other tests that are not typically covered by health insurance, may have a negative impact on economic wellness without actually contributing any positive benefit to your overall wellness. Experiencing fear around food that results from arbitrary food rules can contribute to disordered eating, which will not contribute to wellness. The feeling of failure, and this is the one that gets me, the feeling of failure that I have heard from so many of the folks that I've talked to who feel that the reason they haven't achieved their expected results is that they've just not been trying hard enough. They've not been strict enough. They've not been compliant enough. And this feeling of failure that stems from these unrealistic expectations to, quote, heal, beat, or reverse their MS can have a serious negative impact on emotional well-being. And I'd like to return to the first slide here. One of the quotes listed here on this article, this newspaper image that I have, is that with time and tenacity, you too can be triumphant over MS. So when I think about the feeling of failure that comes from not having enough tenacity to be triumphant over MS, that is very harmful. And I don't see the value of that. And yet that quote was taken from an article I found on the internet. So what are some red flags? Red flags that might indicate you're heading into myth territory. One red flag might be that the information is based on testimonials or anecdotes, not on research. Or the information should suggest that MS is caused by a faulty diet and can be treated nutritionally. The information might be suspicious of traditional Western medicine, or there might be simplistic conclusions drawn from a complicated study. Recommendations might be based on a single cherry-picked study, or you're encouraged to spend money on products or services to achieve the lifestyle that's promoted. Maybe they use dramatic statements that are refuted by reputable scientific organizations. Often there are red flags. A big red flag is lists of good foods and bad foods. Foods to eat with MS, foods to avoid because of MS. Some more red flags, the use of vague language or jargon. like I said, heal, beat, or reverse. I would include root cause in that vague language or jargon. Recommendations from studies that ignore the differences among people or groups. One treatment protocol is said to heal a long list of conditions. Science is alluded to, but no actual references to reputable journal studies are provided, or maybe they are citing a reputable article, but they've misrepresented or misinterpreted the information. And then there are dire warnings of danger from a single product or regimen. One of the ones that I'll point out is the standard American diet, that phrase. As a dietitian who's worked in a hospital, working with people, American people, I can tell you there's nothing standard about the way people consume food. There is no standard American diet. But it's the important takeaway from this is that if the information you're looking for is really important to you, you need to look in more than one place. You need to dig deep. It's not enough to get your opinions and information from just one website. So let's take a look. In preparation for this webinar, I Googled the question, is there a diet for MS? I had several thousand articles to choose from, but I clicked on one that was entitled a certain hashtag number of ways to treat MS naturally. I thought that it might be helpful if we walked through some of the claims made in this article and see if we can find any red flags. The first one, it didn't take long because there was a mention of an autoimmune protocol that included eliminating certain foods from the diet, the good foods and the bad foods. I've listed here some foods: dairy, grains, gluten, beans, grass-fed beef, nightshades, sugar, carbohydrates, fermented foods, eggs, 9 to 15 cups of vegetables a day, right? First of all, it's important to know that I've included the little halo with angel wings over there because it's really important to remember there are no good foods, there are no bad foods, there are only foods. Food nourishes our bodies and our souls. All foods can be a part of a healthy eating pattern. It doesn't really, there's no nutritional benefit to claiming some foods are good and some foods are bad. In fact, a recent study that was published in The Lancet said that more than half of all global diet-related deaths in 2017 were due to eating not enough grains and not enough fruit. So I guess what I'm saying is that it's really important to maybe consider rethinking your food map. Stop trying to eliminate foods from your diet and remember to add them. I will say that this 9 to 15 cups of vegetables a day, going back to the standard American diet, I have difficulty encouraging people, most people I work with have difficulty eating 2 cups of vegetables a day. If you can get 9 to 15 cups of vegetables in your everyday diet, that's quite something. But another red flag on this particular mention of autoimmune protocols, it's important to remember that there are over 50 autoimmune conditions, each with a different etiology and a different manifestation. No one, quote, set of arbitrary rules can address all of them. Again, the best thing you could do with food is to focus on addition, not subtraction. One of the other recommendations made in this article was eat organic foods and stay away from GMOs. GMOs stand for genetically modified organisms, which are thought to be harmful to humans. The red flag, dire warnings of danger from a single product or regimen. The takeaway from this is that there's no science supporting a connection of organic foods or GMOs to multiple sclerosis. If you choose to include these or don't include these foods in your diet, that's a personal choice, but it should not be made based on having multiple sclerosis. Get tested for food sensitivities. The article goes on to say, the article on the internet, in the one that says that the number of, hashtag number of ways to heal MS naturally, get tested for food sensitivities. The article says this is extremely important because some food allergies and sensitivities are known to make MS symptoms worse because the reaction they cause creates widespread inflammation throughout your body. The red flag is an enormous simplistic conclusion drawn from a complex study. The research study cited here is an observational study that suggests MS patients with allergies have more active disease than those without allergies. This study assessed allergies and MS activity at the same time, and with an observational study, you cannot draw cause and effect conclusions. It's also important to know that food allergies and food sensitivities are not the same thing. The research study that this article cited does not mention the word food sensitivity at all, and yet they have extended this, they've made them equal. They've suggested that food allergies and sensitivities are the same thing, and that by having these things, it's going to result in widespread inflammation. And the takeaway message here is that if you've been diagnosed with a food allergy, with or without MS, it's important to honor or comply with any necessary dietary restrictions, but speak to your healthcare team for guidance on that. Get a blood test to check your vitamin levels. This article goes on to say that many MS sufferers are extremely low in several vitamins, which may contribute to an incidence and progression of disease, the MS disease. I'd like to, if you click on the article and you read that research study, the study cited is a review study that discusses the potential roles of vitamins in incidence, progression, and improvement of multiple sclerosis. There is no mention in the study to suggest that, quote, many MS sufferers are extremely low in several vitamins. This is a misrepresentation of the cited article, and this notion is often used to recommend testing for what many providers refer to as subclinical nutrient deficiencies, and they offer a test to help you uncover those, and then sell you supplements to correct those deficiencies, those subclinical deficiencies. It's important to know that your body prefers to get nutrients from food. If supplements are required, make sure you look for the USP label or check with consumerlab.com because supplements are not regulated. And if you're taking medications, it's really important to share any and all supplements you take with your whole healthcare team in the event that there is a nutrient interaction or a interaction between your supplement and your medication. The article then goes on to say, go gluten-free or limit gluten consumption. This is one of the probably most persistent nutrition myths related to multiple sclerosis that I've encountered. This particular article says that if you're sensitive to gluten, it will cause widespread inflammation in the body, manifesting in leaky gut. The red flag here is a simplistic conclusion from a complex study. It uses pseudoscience jargon, including leaky gut. The takeaway is that MS, having multiple sclerosis, does not make it necessary to avoid or limit gluten. If you choose to do so, it's important to know that you may end up with unintended nutrient deficiencies because gluten-free foods are not fortified in the same way that conventional foods are. Speak to your healthcare team before making any dietary changes. I would add to that if you are concerned about inflammation, prior to removing large swaths of food from your eating pattern, I would encourage you to ask your doctor to provide a test to determine if you actually have widespread systemic inflammation. There is a blood test called C-reactive protein and another one called sed rate. Those tests can determine if you have widespread inflammation. And if a provider suggests that you eliminate food, it's really important to monitor the impact of that intervention. If you're removing large swaths of food from your eating pattern, how will you know when the inflammation is gone if you're not monitoring that? Because it may not be necessary to remove those foods from your eating pattern. And following up on the jargon, leaky gut is not a clinically recognized diagnosis. While the gut is an exciting area of research, it's in its very early stages. Research is underway, but it is not yet conclusive. We do know a few things. We know that research suggests that the microbial contents of the gut, the microbiome, can be altered by the diet as well as medications, stress, and other things. It may affect the immune system, and that people with MS may have a different microbiome than the non-MS population. What we don't know yet is that what makes a favorable and unfavorable microbiome. In other words, what defines a healthy gut, what defines an unhealthy gut. And then we also don't know what is the best approach to alter it. So if we did know, for example, what was a healthy gut, how would we know to get your unhealthy gut to a healthy gut? In other words, the news is exciting and promising, but we still have a lot to learn. We have a long way to go, and there are a number of internet salespeople who are trying to sell supplements, regimens, and protocols that are aimed at healing your gut because of multiple sclerosis. And if you just ask yourself, look at it through the lens of knowing that we don't yet know how to do that, then what are they selling? So that's an important question to ask and to consider before you make a purchase. So to sum up here, this part of it, nutrition science and MS are in its very early stages. There have been some studies, clinical trials on the ketogenic diet, swank diet, the Wahls protocol, low-fat, I believe that was a low-fat vegetarian diet, intermittent fasting, and Mediterranean diet. At this point, there's no conclusive evidence from intervention trials that suggests that folks with MS would benefit, like the entire group of folks with MS would benefit from pursuing one particular regimen over the other. And at this point, I think I'm going to hand it off to Kate to talk about dairy products and some of the myths around dairy and MS.
Sure. One thing I'd like to just piggyback on what Mona was saying, that a lot of the studies right now of diet and MS, specifically some of the ones that I'm going to be discussing, they're pretty small and pretty short in duration. So a lot of them couldn't make any definitive conclusions about the effects of diet on MS-specific outcomes, like developing a new lesion or a relapse, but they were able to make some small conclusion about specific symptoms that are common in people with MS. So we don't even know as of right now if these specific diets are super important for MS disease processes. So the first thing, before we get into the specific studies and things like that, I just wanted to discuss a couple of outstanding potential dietary myths that go along with what Mona had been discussing. So the first one I wanted to talk about was that dairy products are unhealthy and bad for my MS. There isn't really any existing research that really supports this claim, but we do know a bunch of things about dairy products, in that they're an important food group because they have protein that your body needs to help its organs work. They also importantly contain calcium that's helpful to strengthen bones. So we know that some research suggests that people with MS are at an increased risk of having lower bone density and having hip fractures, which are associated with poorer mobility and a bunch of adverse outcomes. And so what we know is that in people with MS, getting enough calcium may help prevent fractures and bone loss. In addition, Dairy products are often fortified with added vitamin D to help your body use the calcium, since many Americans don't get enough of these nutrients. In addition, with respect to MS, some studies show that having high enough vitamin D levels may help your MS, in that it may help prevent relapses or the formation of new lesions. The second potential myth with respect to diet I wanted to discuss is that anti-inflammatory paleo vegetarian diets are always healthier and will help you lose weight. While there is some specific research that shows having a healthy vegetarian eating plan or a plant-focused eating plan is associated with lower obesity and lower risk of developing high blood pressure or heart disease in the general population, however, we do know that a vegetarian diet will only lead to weight loss or some of these other comorbidities if you reduce the total number of calories you take in. So some vegetarians may make food choices that could lead to weight gain or other unintended consequences, including eating so instead of eating meat or other animal products, they replace these foods with those that are high in calories, high in saturated fats, or other sugars. So Mona alluded to this a lot in her slides, but the last possible myth we wanted to discuss is that there is an MS-specific diet. So to be honest, right now we don't know, but it's probably unlikely. There aren't large enough studies that are long enough that can tell us that there is a specific diet for MS. These are what's listed here on the screen are some of the hypothesized diets that may have relevance to MS. The listing here is arbitrary, and there's a varying levels of degree of evidence for each of these diets. And so they include the paleo diet, the gluten-free diet, which we had discussed a lot. The paleo diet, or the Walls diet, is a modified paleo diet. The Swank diet, which is a very low-fat diet, a low-sodium diet, a Mediterranean, just a general healthy American diet, or fasting-style diets, which are when you alter the timing and amount of your food intake. So I think we've been discussing a lot of what we don't know about diet and what are some common misconceptions, but I think it's important now to discuss what we really do know about diet in MS. So one of the aspects, or one of the reasons why having a healthy diet could be important for people with MS is that we do know that emergent studies suggest that diseases like obesity, diabetes, high cholesterol, or high blood pressure are associated with poor MS outcomes. So these are metabolic or vascular comorbidities, which are highly linked with things like obesity or having too much body weight. They're overrepresented in people with MS and are associated with poor MS outcomes. So what we do know is that the rates, so for example, in one study, they found that the rates of hypertension or high blood pressure, high cholesterol, or diabetes are increased in the 5 years following an MS diagnosis relative to the 5 years prior to an MS diagnosis. In addition, other studies have found that obesity or excess body weight was associated with faster rates of brain volume loss in people with MS and a faster conversion of developing the progressive form of MS relative to individuals who are of normal weights. So this is consistent with what we know about obesity in the general population, so people without MS, in that excess adipose tissue or fat tissue has adverse consequences on the immune system. So as what Mona was mentioning, so high levels of inflammation are often monitored by blood, or circulating inflammation are monitored by blood tests, including the C-reactive protein, or CRP, and the SED rate. And so we know that obesity is associated with an increase in those circulating markers in the general population. In addition, the level of metabolic dysfunction, so how much obesity-associated inflammation is associated with inflammatory markers in their blood that are that are associated with poor MS outcomes. So, okay. And then, so finally, so in addition to what we know about comorbidities, we can also discuss some of the results of some small preliminary studies of different types of diet in MS. And so I just selected these two studies because they were both recently completed, and they looked both at a Mediterranean type of diet as well as an intermittent fasting diet, which is where we change the timing and the amount of, or when you eat specific foods. So for intermittent fasting, so there are a variety of ways you can do this diet. You can consume a normal diet on one day and then fast the next day. So that's called alternate day fasting. In addition, there's what's called the 5-2 diet. So this is the specific diet that I'm going to discuss a little bit in a minute. And so what that is you eat normally, you eat for 5 days a week, and then 2 days of the week that you consume drastically less. So you eat about 25% of your daily calorie needs. And then there's time-limited feeding or time-restricted feeding. And what this is when you restrict your eating window to specific hours of the day. So you consume all of your daily meals between 12 and 8, and then you fast between 8 p.m. and then 12 p.m. the next day. What we do know, at least preliminarily, is that these types of diet are shown to be equivalent to regular calorie restriction in terms of weight loss. And then the benefits to MS-specific disease processes in humans are currently being investigated. What we do know is that in the mouse forms of MS, so how we do some research on using an animal model of MS, we know that fasting or reducing the amount of calories that the animal eats delayed the onset and reduces the severity of MS in the mouse. It also reduces pro-inflammatory cytokines, which are the markers in your blood that can promote disease or to MS disease processes, as well as increase the regulatory T cells, so the type of immune cell that can control the inflammatory T cells or the inflammatory immune cells that promote MS activities like relapses or the formation of new lesions. In other mouse models of MS that include demyelination or remyelination models, which are studies that investigate how the myelin within your brain, which is specific in MS, can regenerate. So researchers found that fasting can promote the spinal cord from the loss of the specific cells that make myelin, as well as the specific cells that become cells that make myelin. They also found that fasting can help promote remyelination, so creation of more additional myelin that's lost that's commonly lost in MS. So just to summarize here, so this is basically a summary of what we know from animal or cell-based studies of fasting in models of MS. Some of the proposed mechanisms are pictured here. So on the top part, we see that fasting could increase regulatory T cells. It could reduce the bad form of T cells and increase the good form of T cells that are circulating in your blood. And then within the central nervous system, it can also promote remyelination, which is pictured below in the little bottom cartoon. So what I've been discussing so far has all been on models of fasting in models of MS. So to look at how fasting could impact MS in humans, we conducted a small pilot trial of daily calorie or intermittent calorie restriction in 36 people with relapsing remitting MS. So before the study began, we performed a test called indirect calorimetry, where we measured the calorie needs of these 36 people, so how many calories they should consume to stay the same weight that they are. Then we randomized, so we chose, like by the flip of a coin, these individuals to a control diet where he or she ate the same calorie needs as he or she was eating before the study, a daily calorie restriction study where he or she ate a diet where the calories were reduced a little bit the same, or by the same little bit each day. So this is mostly what people would think about when you go on a diet. You reduce the calories you eat a little bit each day. And then the last possible diet a person could be randomized to was an intermittent fasting diet. So these people on 5 days a week, they ate the calories that they were eating before the study began, and then 2 days a week they only consumed 25% of their calorie needs. So this translated to roughly around 500 calories per day on those fasting days. So we did this study over 8 weeks where we shipped participants all of their meals over the whole 8-day period. What we found was that both types of calorie restriction diets were associated with weight loss, but as you might expect, the intermittent fasting group, they had a harder time adhering to the diet. We didn't find any significant difference between the two types of calorie restriction diets with respect to weight loss, but we did find that randomization to either one of the calorie restriction diets, so the little bit reduced each day, or the intermittent fasting, so the 2 specific days of fasting, they were associated with their improvements in mood and depressive symptoms, which we found that correlated significantly with how much weight loss the individuals have. Right now we're doing some tests to see if there were any differences in the function of immune cells between all of the different diets, but those results we don't know the answers to those studies yet. So this slide is just a summary of the results that I mentioned. On the left side, that we can see that the 2 groups who are in the calorie restriction arm, so the bottom 2 bars, or in the bottom 2 bars in the calorie restriction arms, so the people who had the calories reduced a little bit each day, or the intermittent fasting where they ate normally for 5 days and then had reduced calories on the 2 days, they lost a statistically significant amount of weight over the 8-week period. And so then on the top right panel, we can see that the intermittent fasting group had a reduced adherence. And so what we found here is that the control and the daily calorie restriction arm, they tended to eat less than what we had provided. However, the intermittent fasting arm, they tended to eat a little bit more than what we had provided to them. Importantly, which I think this is an important take-home message, is that what we found was that among the individuals who are randomized to either calorie restriction diet, so the daily or the intermittent fasting, and those individuals who had lost weight, they had a significant improvement in their mood or depressive symptoms over the course of the 8-week studies. There are additionally some important considerations before starting a fasting style diet. And so the first of these is to be sure to consult with your doctor before starting. Your medications and the timing of your medications may need to be discussed, need to be adjusted. Some of the side effects for starting a fasting style diet include hunger, potentially fatigue or dizziness. We recommend that you not attempt this if you have a history of disordered eating, a tendency to binge, or are pregnant or nursing or planning to be. And we also don't know much about how fasting works in children and teenagers, so we recommend that they should not fast at this time. There was, in addition to fasting style diet, I also wanted to discuss a modified Mediterranean diet. So there was also a recent small pilot study of a modified Mediterranean diet in 36 other people with MS. So in this study, what the researchers did, they recommended Mediterranean diet intervention for 6 months that was delivered through educational settings. So as opposed to the previous study where they provided food for all of the participants over the 8-week period, this study was educational intervention for a period of 6 months. So what this means is that the researchers encourage participants to eat fish and other foods high in poly and monounsaturated fats, which are the type of fats that are most common in nuts or olive oil, fresh fruit, vegetables, and whole grains. And they also recommended eliminating processed meat and tried to recommend that individuals consume less than 2 grams of salt per day. So because the study was relatively small and pretty short, like the intermittent fasting study, it couldn't make conclusions about the effects of diet on specific MS outcomes like developing new lesions or relapses. So just to kind of describe some of the results of this study, so what's pictured on the top left where it says intervention group is the individuals who are in the intervention arms or those who attended educational sessions about the Mediterranean diets. So the pink bars are the average intake of the fish, fruit, olive oil, and other items before the dietary intervention, and then the blue bars are the average intake of these foods after the dietary intervention. What you can see is that intake of these key items increased over the course of the study, whereas we can't see a similar thing in the control study. So what's the lighter shaded regions on the right-hand side are the average intake before and after who did not attend the diet-specific MS interventions. So instead of attending interventions related to diet, these people had general MS information. So they still had to attend a session. So what you can see is that those who did not attend the diet-specific interventions did not change intake for these specific foods, which are emphasized by the Mediterranean diet. Importantly, the study found that the Mediterranean diet education sessions, among those who attended these sessions and had an improved intake of food, they had an improved quality of life as well as reduced fatigue severity occurring over the 6-month period. The U.S. Dietary Guidelines also provides recommendations on how to follow a Mediterranean diet for Americans based on your calorie needs, which is on the left we have a table of your calorie needs above, so in the maroon panel, and then the recommended intake broken down by type of food below. So for example, an individual who consumes 2,000 kilocalories per day, the USDA recommends consuming 2.5 cups of vegetables per day or 2 cups of fruit per day as an example of the recommended intakes for individuals who are consuming a healthy an American-style Mediterranean diet. To summarize some of these recommendations, this diet tries to emphasize intake of fruits and vegetables, whole grains, fish, olive oil, nuts, and seeds, but make sure with those high-calorie contexts to watch out for portion size. This type of diet also emphasizes limiting foods which are high in saturated fats or those which are empty calories, which are foods with high added sugars, desserts, or soda. So rather than focusing on a specific diet, these recommendations are supported by the American Heart Association, the American Diabetes Association, American Stroke Association, and the American Institutes of Cancer Research, the Arthritis Foundation, and the developers of the MIND diet, which is they recommend consumptions of these specific foods. They include colorful vegetables and fruits, lean proteins, beans, legumes, nuts, and seeds, whole grains, healthy fats, low-fat calcium-containing foods, while limiting saturated fats, sodiums and added sugar, and then avoiding trans fats in their entirety. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Mona, who's going to discuss some key ways to become a Mythbuster yourself.
Thank you, Katherine. Yes, and as she mentioned a moment ago, just on the last slide, she has mentioned, and so many of in the information that she provided, the importance of comorbidities and maintaining overall entire body wellness. It might be a really good idea to focus less on arbitrary food rules and just focus on consuming these foods, the foods that she listed, because doing so will keep your entire body healthy. And since there is no research yet to support a specific dietary intervention that can alter the MS disease course, it might be the more important focus to keep your whole body healthy. So that's important. But it's also, as important as it is to consume quality food, it's really important to consume quality information. And one of the best ways you can do that is to be a Mythbuster yourself. Unfortunately, there is such a wide array of information available on the internet and elsewhere. It's upon us. It's become our responsibility to do that for ourselves. And there are a few steps you can take to help make sure that the information you are reading is valuable, credible, and reliable. Starting with step one, identify where the information is being sourced. Are they citing any evidence or research, and then follow up on that. To step two, determine if the author is an expert on the topic. Just ask for evidence, look for studies, look for research, and then evaluate if the evidence is anecdotal. Are they saying that this worked for me, one individual, therefore it will work for you? Or is it based on an intervention study? Is there research to support these claims? And determine if the claim that the person is making contradicts scientific consensus. So if the scientific world all seems to be in agreement of a certain thing, and if they're suggesting something that goes counter to that, then that might not be the most reliable bit of information. Identify the source of the article, the media, or journal. So much as we did when I went through those slides, I found an article on the internet inside of which were clickable. I could click into the research that they were citing. It's important to do that to determine that the research exists, and B, to make sure that the article is saying they're interpreting that research appropriately. All of these things can be a little bit confusing, which is why it's really important to ask an expert for help. An expert might be your medical doctor or someone on your healthcare team. You can also ask a librarian. There are research librarians in many college libraries anyway. You can ask them to help you determine if what you are looking at is a credible source of information. Additionally, the link here that evaluating internet health information, the Medline Plus, if you click on, if that takes you to a printable PDF of a great deal of information that will help you know if the website that you are looking at, if you click into a website to give you health or nutrition information, it will help you to discern if the website you are looking at is a credible source of information or not. And that can be a really valuable tool. Also, Can Do MS, the webinars and library articles of past, things that Can Do has already done a webinar on or written an article about, can be another valuable resource. So check out the Can Do MS library. And then also the National MS Society offers a great deal of resources on diet and MS, so you can check out their library of resources to help you as well. The important thing is sadly and unfortunately, it's on us to kind of parse this out ourselves. So it's really important that you just not take the one social media reference to something and assume that that is a credible way to proceed. But that concludes what I have to share this afternoon. So I think Brian's going to talk to us about some questions and answers.
All right. Thank you so much, Mona and Katherine, for that great information and your different perspectives and experiences on a really important and confusing topic. So we hopefully our audience tonight gain a little bit of information about ways to look through some of those internet articles and other things out there and get a sense of some of the research that's really going on to break through those myths. So we have a few minutes for some questions, and thank you for those of you who are submitting your questions online. Many of these questions are going to be coming from registration questions beforehand. And so the most common questions that we received, I'm going to kind of group a few together, is on sort of these special diets that are out there, specifically a few to name, the Swank diet, the Walls diet, the Dash diet, the South Beach diet. Sort of on a broad level, can you talk a little bit about some of these special diets that are out there? Any research are more conclusive than others, and maybe where people can go to get more information on if these diets are right for them?
Kate, I'll let you start first if that's...
Sure. So I know there are several studies that are ongoing right now. So, for example, one study is looking at if adherence to the Walls diet could help improve fatigue in people with MS. But right now, we honestly don't know for those specific diets. I can say that a lot of the diets they kind of have more in common with one another than they don't have in common. And so if that's any indication, so most diets, they emphasize intake of fruits and vegetables, as well as low intakes of things like the so-called like empty calories, like dessert foods or soda. Or other processed foods. So I think the big take-home message with those specific diets is that there's studies going on right now, but currently most of the evidence has been anecdotal, and so it's hard to draw. We shouldn't draw conclusions from this type of evidence. So I don't know if you want to add to that, Mona.
Yes, I'd like to add essentially that, as Kate said, nothing is conclusive. And I think Brian asked what is effective and what is not. Are there any potential unintended consequences? And I'd just like to point out that because we don't have the answers, we don't have necessarily the unintended consequences either. But also, I know on some of these more paleo, there is a reliance more on red meats and organ meats and things of that nature. And so if you have cardiovascular disease, you might be, in an unintended way, consuming more saturated fat. But other than that, I would just make sure there aren't any unintended consequences and stay in touch with your healthcare team.
That's great advice, especially that piece about consulting with your healthcare team. Other really common questions that are coming in are just the relationship between nutrition and MS symptoms, and it seems like the most common being these cognitive and mood symptoms that are so common for people. This one viewer said they just read an article about how chocolate can help with some cognitive symptoms. Any thoughts on diet specifically to mood and cognition symptoms? If there's any research or any things that you've noticed food-wise to help with these symptoms?
I'll start on that one. Chocolate is, like I said, there's room for everything in the diet, and chocolate, especially if it's 70% or greater cacao, it is an antioxidant. but typically that's also consumed in a chocolate bar as opposed to just the cocoa powder. So that's going to bring with it saturated fat. So if you want to treat yourself with an antioxidant, that is, that's the point of, that is the benefit one gets from eating chocolate. That's a great thing. Just keep in mind the portion size. And as it relates to fatigue and cognition, I would say the best way that you can fight fatigue with your fork and cognitive challenges is by eating very nutrient-dense, high-quality food as often as you can, as opposed to those calorie-dense foods that don't really provide any vitamins or minerals or anything of any nutritional value.
And just to piggyback
Kate, did you have something to add?
Yeah, sure. Just to piggyback on what you were mentioning, so kind of emphasizing the nutrient-dense foods, they'll also help you maintain a healthy weight. And we know that having excess weight is more common in people who having excess weight is more common in people who eat a poor diet. And then we also know that fatigue and some symptoms of some common MS symptoms are more common in people who are overweight as opposed to individuals who are normal weight. So it may be a way to mitigate some of those symptoms.
Great, thank you. Take a step back. We talked a little bit about gut health, and so much information on that is out there now. And so this question is, could you address acute ways to promote gut health? Is there anything beyond just taking probiotics? And what is the relationship of gut bacteria to overall health? So that was sort of a 3-for-1 question, but any more information on that may be relevant to the audience?
I feel so I think that it's important to emphasize with those studies that this study is these types of studies are in their infancy, so we don't know what specific type of bacteria are best for people with MS. We don't know if taking a pill or a probiotic actually alters those types of bacteria. So can you even are they amenable to change using a pill? We also don't know if what those specific bacteria are actually producing that could help either harm or help MS. So I would just caution with respect to all of that, all of the of adopting a specific diet or supplement use with the intention of promoting gut health.
I would add that if you take MS out of the equation just for a moment, because even people without MS have a gut, one way to keep the viable, good, healthy bacteria that exist in all of our guts, one way to keep them healthy is to make sure that they are well fed, and you can do that by consuming lots of prebiotic-rich prebiotic-rich foods, and prebiotics are a fiber that don't entirely digest in your gut. Instead, what they do is ferment, and it's that fermentation process that keeps the healthy, good bacteria well fed. So going back to that eating well, eating easy slide, just consuming a balanced diet that's rich in plant, whole grains, fruits and vegetables, that will in turn keep your gut healthy until such time as, like Kate says, the studies that are in their infancy now, until they have something conclusive to offer, it's really important to just keep your gut bacteria well fed by making sure they get lots of healthy prebiotic fiber.
Great, thank you. So much of this sounds individual, and so this question is about evaluation testing. Do you recommend a nutritional evaluation test on individuals, and what does that typically entail?
Leave that
I
to
suppose
you.
I'll take. Okay. So the phrase nutritional evaluation to me, or nutritional evaluation test, is one that's unfamiliar to me. As a dietitian, I do an evaluation on you, but I don't do, nor would a normal in the typical course of working with someone would I run any sort of blood test. I did mention in my slides there are practitioners who suggest subclinical nutrient deficiencies and offer blood tests to determine those, and I'm doing air quotes, subclinical, because that means you're unaware of them. Those tests are quite expensive. They invariably end up suggesting that you are requiring supplementation that they also will sell you. So I don't necessarily endorse those. I do not endorse those. I don't offer anything like that myself. If your physician finds that you are deficient in vitamin D or iron or something to that nature, then your physician will help you to correct that deficiency with supplementation. But a nutrition evaluation, when I work with somebody, takes in your whole history and helps you to overcome any challenges you are creating a healthy eating pattern for yourself. And I do recommend that, but these tests I'm not sure about. So I just want to clarify that I'm not entirely familiar with that phrase that this questioner has used.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. So we have time for a couple more. Mona, going back to what you were saying about food allergies, this writer has been seeing some articles about the relationship between food allergies and the prevalence and progression of MS. Would you say, broadly speaking, that at this point, any connection between the two is more on the myth side and not on the factual basis side?
And Kate might be able to answer this more specifically. What I, as a dietitian, have encountered is many people come to me with questions about a great number of people tend to make food sensitivities and food allergies the same thing, and that's just not the case. Food allergies are there's a protein involved food allergies involve a protein. Food sensitivities, the testing for and what that even means, that's kind of a medical gray area. A lot of folks that I tend to lump under the Dr. Google approach tend to suggest that food sensitivities are more prevalent in people with MS. I can't say that that's the case. The article that was cited in that I referred to on my slide references the co-occurrence of food allergies and multiple sclerosis potentially playing a role in the disease process, but it was not the type of study that could draw those conclusions. So I would say the important thing to know is that food sensitivities are not the same thing as food allergies, but maybe Kate could offer a little more information on that.
I can offer just some aspects of interpreting that study design. So that study it's an observational study, so it's not randomized, but it's also what we call a cross-sectional study, and so that's the weakest kind of observational study because basically what happens is they report people with, or they asked people if they had a food allergy, and then measured their MS, I think, relapses at the same time. And so what that study can't determine is that maybe people with food allergies, they think that they're related to their MS, so they're more likely to report it, whereas some people without food allergies might be less likely to report it. So it's really hard to draw what's the cause and what's the effect there from that type of study.
Great, thank you. And then speaking of some of those studies that you were talking about, Kate, do they tend to be on a kind of a cross-section of ages and demographics, or are they fairly narrow? And this one person in particular is asking if there are studies specifically with postmenopausal women and the impacts of diet. Are there any kind of specific studies towards that group?
Not that I know of right now. So most of the studies have tended to be among younger people. So that's a really important question. I think that will need to be explored in future research studies.
And I'd like to add to that just so there are some things changing in our bodies when we go through menopause, and that is that the calories that we need, we require fewer calories as we age and are less active. And as we age, our metabolism slows down. So when we're going through menopause, it's entirely possible that our weight may be shifting, specifically, where we carry our weight. And as Kate mentioned, obesity tends to be related to comorbidities. So it's in that role that it's in that way that menopause may have something to do indirectly with this, but like Kate says, I'm not aware of any studies that address menopause and MS specifically.
Great. So last question, Mona, as you know, at Can Do MS, we talk a lot about communication and how important that is. And so we did get a couple questions about, if you're really trying to be conscious about your diet and maybe the rest of the family isn't totally on board with this plan. What are some tips to communicate breaking through these myths or communicating MS-related dietary needs to family members? Any sort of tips on communication?
Well, that's a deep question right there. To begin with, if one member of a family wants to change the focus of the eating habits to maybe include more fruits and vegetables, to include more whole grains, that may be difficult if the whole family's not on board with that. That might necessitate preparing two of something or maybe even more, which can make it more difficult at mealtime. And if the person with MS is also preparing the food, they may require assistance. So I would just consider making time to express to your family members how important it is that you, the person with MS, to make these changes. And maybe specifically regarding family members, it's important to communicate if you need help. Husbands, bless their hearts, they're not mind readers. Neither are kids. So you have to actually say it out loud. I could use some help with tearing up the salad greens or whatever. So asking for help is a really important part of the communication process. Great.
Well, thank you both, Mona and Katherine, for spending your time with us and that great information. Thank you all of our participants for joining us this evening. I'd like to conclude by telling you about a few other programs and resources that may be of interest to you. As I mentioned, this is part of our monthly webinar series, and we are gearing up for 2020, and you will be receiving an email here in the next week or so to register for the 2020 series. And the good news is you only have to register once, and then you are in for all 12 monthly webinars. So you can visit cando-ms.org to see what topics are coming up. And we hope that you can join us every month for these webinars, because we think it's a great way to gain a little bit of information from the comfort of your own home. If we didn't get to your question this evening, you can submit a question to the Ask the Can Do team, and we can pass that on to our program's consultants to try to get you an answer. We also have some great library articles that our consultants have written. Finally, we have in-person programs all over the country, so we may be coming to a town near you, so please visit cando-ms.org to learn more about our programs and resources. In addition, on that website, you'll find different ways to get involved with Can Do MS to ensure that we can put on free programs to every family that's in need of support and education. We have a great new peer-to-peer fundraising platform called Kick MS, and you can learn more about that, again, at cando-ms.org. In addition, the National MS Society has some wonderful resources at nationalmssociety.org. We certainly recommend the MS Navigator program that you can call in and get some really specific and local resources in your area. So again, we're proud to partner with the National MS Society and hope you access their resources and programs at nationalmssociety.org. We hope you'll join us next month, January 14th, 2020, for our new webinar series for 2020. The first topic will be on resilience. We'll be joined by a clinical psychologist as well as a couple that is living with MS to kind of set a roadmap for the new year. You will be receiving an email to register for the series. You'll have to register again for the new year. You can also do that online at cando-ms.org. So again, thank you everyone for joining us this evening. As soon as we click out of here, a survey will pop up on your screen. If you could take a few moments to fill in as many comments and details as you can, let us know what you found valuable, what you wish we had talked about, how these programs can be helpful for you. All your comments are extremely important to us. So again, thank you all so much for joining us this evening. Katherine and Mona, any closing comments to our audience tonight?
For me.
Just have a happy holiday.
All right. Thank you all so much, and we'll see you again on January 14th. Have a good night.